Hello there, fans of classic rock bands. This is Peter Skov for Music is a Journey. Today we continue with yet another episode of the first 10 albums of a band. Today we are taking a look at the first 10 albums of Yes, because Yes's debut album was released on July 25th, 1969. So we're coming up to around July 25th. It's about time we did this video in the set. Okay. So, a little bit about Yes. Of course, Yes, probably people watching this video already know tons about it. This is a program from their 2014 tour. They were playing Fragile and the Yes album and Close to the Edge in their entirety, as well as they played a couple of new songs from the Heaven and Earth album. I have Close to the Edge, The Story of Yes by Chris Welch, which I read probably about 12 years ago. And another good book to read here, this was Rick Wakeman, Grumpy Old Rock Star, which covers some mostly stories from his solo career actually, but includes some Yes stories as well. This is a hilarious book. Of course, if you know Rick, he's got one incredible sense of humor and is a very entertaining joke teller. And another book of interest maybe is this one here, Bill Bruford, The Autobiography, which of course covers his time with Yes, as well as King Crimson, UK, solo stuff, Earthworks, etc., etc. This book, the first bit starts out very interesting. Bill has a kind of dry sense of humor, a little bit cynical. It's very entertaining, but the latter half of the book starts to get a little bit too cynical and a bit jaded and bitter, and is not as much fun. Sounds more like the grumpy old rock star, which Rick is not. So let's go over a brief history of the band as we take a look at those first 10 albums. Of course, Yes, coming out of Mabel Greer's Toy Shop was the name of a band with Chris Squire. Chris Squire previously having been in a band called The Sin. And Chris Squire, basically, Mabel Greer's Toy Shop wasn't really, very promising act, and so after some member changes, they ended up putting together the original lineup of Yes, including John Anderson on vocals, John Anderson having been in other bands as well as doing a single solo release under the name of Hans Christian. We got Peter Banks in on guitar, Tony Kaye, I think he was the last one to join, playing keyboards, basically organ and piano, and of course the amazing Bill Bruford on drums. Now the band, they were deciding the name of the band, and I think one member said it should be, maybe it was John Anderson said it should be Life, and Chris Squire said it should be World, and Peter Banks said yes. And they thought, yeah, that's it. That's the name of the band. I guess they wanted something positive, so yeah. They went with the name Yes. Now, actually, in the early days, Bill Bruford actually left the band to continue his studies in, I think it was accounting. And they got another person to come in to play the drums. However, when Bill Bruford went to see the band performing live with his replacement drummer, he felt the drummer just couldn't stand up to the job that was required of a Yes drummer. And so Bruford decided he would rejoin the band. Now, they had one of their big breaks. They'd been working their way up, playing in some of the local clubs around London, but their big break came during Cream's farewell tour, where Yes were invited to be the opening act at the Royal Albert Hall. And a funny thing in Bill Bruford's autobiography, he recounts that evening playing the Royal Albert Hall for the first time, and he said, "There is no sound louder than the sound of a drumstick being dropped in the Royal Albert Hall." They apparently opened the show with the song Something's Coming, which is included as a bonus track on the CD and was not part of the original album. And there is a very fancy little drum solo at the beginning, so I guess that's where the dropped stick incident happened. So anyway, they got around to recording their debut album, and that was released on July 25th, 1969. And I have my CD version here with some stickers blocking the view, but of course it is a black background with, quite simply, Yes coming out here. I don't remember who designed it. 8 songs on here and several bonus tracks on this CD. An interesting album. Like, one of the things I noticed listening to it again the other day for the first time in a while is how the triple vocals of John Anderson, Chris Squire, and Peter Banks really figures into so many of the songs. I think it was by the second or third track, oh yeah, I See You, when the second track, I See You, when John Anderson actually gets some solo lines, it just popped out like, wow, that's John Anderson singing by himself. Because basically the whole first track, Beyond and Before, is sung with all three of them together. Cats are fighting downstairs. Anyway, where am I on this? This is the second time I've been interrupted now. So, I forgot what I was saying, but anyway, yes, the triple vocals. We also hear the band already coming up with their more complex arrangements and their more fanciful instrumental work here. But one thing I find listening to this album, and I don't know if this is the remastering of this particular version, but I feel the vocals, the bass, and the drums are at the forefront of the mix. The guitar is a little bit back, and the organ is behind the guitar. So unless the organ is being a feature instrument at any one time, when the songs are in full swing, the organ is almost like just as a kind of background sound, which is really unusual because usually that's where the bass is, right? But the bass is really at the front. And I'm not sure if it's, when they were remastering this, I don't know if it's because, obviously Chris Squire being the one man to be in Yes from the beginning up until his passing in 2015, and Bill Bruford, obviously a very highly regarded drummer, and John Anderson and the vocalists singing, So maybe they all had to be at the front, and then Peter Banks, who's already passed away and had no say in the matter, he could be left in the background a bit. I'm not sure. But actually, I think this is a very strong release. And there was somebody, Lester Bangs, writing for Rolling Stone. Lester Bangs often being very critical of different bands. He actually gave this a rather favorable review, calling it, I think, an above average debut. Was that Yes that he wrote that about? And someone else also cited Yes and Led Zeppelin as being two bands most likely to succeed, which is interesting. There is, one thing, listening to it now, an arrangement here of Every Little Thing, the Beatles song. And it's quite interesting because the opening of the song is actually quite heavy and intense. And see if I can sneak just a little bit of it in here now. See? There's pretty intense stuff there, but then it lightens up a bit. We hear the guitar riff for Day Tripper, and then it switches into Every Little Thing. The one track on here that is not on the album but is included as a bonus track that I think is my favorite is Something's Coming, which is what it's... Doesn't say who wrote it. Is it from West Side Story? I think it is. I just really love that song. It is actually one of my favorite songs of the 60s and one of my favorite Yes songs. I just love how they did it. There are so many strong points in the music, from Bill Bruford's drum solo to the sound of Chris Squire's bass in some parts to the vocal arrangements. That whole thing, around the corner, whistling down the river. I love that, with all three voices going at the same time in harmony. It's beautiful stuff. Great track. And Chris Welch in the Book of Yes, I pointed out, actually said that song probably best encapsulates what Yes were going to become. So that was the debut. And then we move on now to the second album, Time in a Word. And this here came around during some touring. They decided to work together with an orchestra and record some of their songs that were intended for the next album with an orchestra. And this was the first real point of contention in the band, because Peter Banks especially felt having an orchestra was fine if the orchestra was going to be treated as another instrument and given its own part. However, what happened was that the orchestra ended up playing some of his parts, or Tony Kaye's parts. So which he thought, well then, why do we need an orchestra if they're doing my part, or why do they need me if the orchestra is going to play my part? Now, I've listened to this album again recently, and I think there are actually 2 tracks that don't include the orchestra, and there are a couple of other tracks that include the orchestra only in parts. So we still get that feeling of the second Yes album and the Yes band, same lineup as on the first album. But Peter Banks expressing more dissatisfaction about the way things were going, and you know, Jon Anderson has been kind of known as the little Napoleon in the band, and I think basically, if he felt things were not working out with somebody, then he made the decision to influence everybody else to say, this guy's got to go. So, reading the Yes story, the book there by Chris Welch, if you talk to Peter Banks, he was basically fired from the band because of his opinion. If you talk to Jon Anderson or somebody else, Chris Squire, they might say that he was not happy in the band and decided that it was in his best interest to leave. Okay, take the story as you want. Anytime somebody gets thrown out of a band or kicked out of a band, you always hear different stories of what really happened. But anyway, Time and a Word coming out in 1970, the original British cover here with a pair of boobs. And the American cover included, well, this one here actually does have Peter Banks in the photo, so that's nice. But by the time it was released in the US, Steve Howe from the band Tomorrow had been asked to take over in Yes, and so the American cover of this album actually shows Yes with Steve Howe, even though he didn't actually play on the album. I like the boobs version best myself, but hey, you know, that's just how I am. Pretty cool album though. There's still like some of my favorite tracks on here. I think it was The Prophet, Astral Traveler, pretty cool. Oh yeah, Time and a Word, the title track, that was another point of contention. Peter Banks showed up at the studio to record that song and found that the strummed instrumental guitar at the beginning had already been recorded by Jon Anderson playing. And he was not particularly impressed with that because Jon Anderson, although being a... Now I have a large insect buzzing around in here. The door is open, oh, for heaven's sake. Yeah, I see it's a stink bug, so I'm not exactly in a hurry to try to remove that one. Yeah, okay, so third distraction of the night. Where was I? Boobs? I think we already talked about those. Yeah, Peter Banks was also not thrilled to find out that Jon Anderson had been playing the acoustic guitar. Jon Anderson having great ideas musically and being a very cool songwriter, but not having any particular skill at any one instrument. Just he can play something. More on that later if I remember to say so. But yes, the second Yes album and the end of the founding lineup with Peter Banks out and Steve Howe coming in to take over on guitar. Not such a bad thing though. Of course, Peter Banks went off to do his own thing elsewhere, but having Steve Howe in the band, he immediately began contributing, writing, and this led to the Yes album in 1971, which is where we start to hear Yes really coming into what... full plumage, if we want to put it that way here. Yes album, this one featuring songs like Yours Is No Disgrace, Perpetual Change, Starship Trooper, which as I've said before is one of my favorite songs. The cat wants to go out. What I need is my own private studio for recording these videos where I can just shut the door and have nobody interrupting me. The Yes album, yeah. Okay, so of course we get those tracks there, key songs, showing the direction the band would go in with these longer tracks with lots of instrumental parts, changes in the music, Jon Anderson's lyric writing becoming more enigmatic in meaning, but very musical in the sound. He liked to put words together that would have a really nice sound to them and not specifically have a direct meaning. We see that in songs like Yours Is No Disgrace, right? Flying, shining, purple wolfhounds. Hi! One of our 3 cats has just entered the room. And the bug is flying. Maybe I should record this video on another night. This is not working out very well. Anyway, of course, what else do we have on this album that stands out? We have I've Seen All Good People, which actually was the... I bought this album on cassette, probably around 1989, because I saw I've Seen All Good People as a video on a TV program about British music from the 60s and 70s, and that made me think I should get this album. So that was actually the first Yes album I ever bought, and then didn't buy anything else until 2011. But here we have it, yeah. And also the song The Clap, well, it's actually an acoustic guitar instrumental. Interesting, I read that it's called Clap on here, but there was some confusion about whether it's called Clap or The Clap, because the way it's introduced, it's from a live recording, and Jon Anderson says it's called The Clap. And because of his accent, we're not sure if he's saying called clap or called the clap, you know? But clap, well, okay, that means clap your hands. And if it's the clap, well, that's a sexually transmitted disease. So probably just clap is better. Or maybe not. But anyway, showing us what Steve Howe is capable of doing on the acoustic guitar. Brilliant album, by the way, and the beginning of a run of really brilliant albums. However, Jon Anderson had a vision for the band to be moving forward, and Tony Kaye was really hooked on sticking with his Hammond organ and flying bug and piano, whereas Jon Anderson wanted him to start using synthesizers, particularly the Moog synthesizer, and he didn't really want to do that, and so it was decided that it was time for Tony to go. And in the meantime, they'd already had their eye on this fella, Jon Anderson had this fella named Rick Wakeman, who had just recently left the Strawbs and had also been playing on various other albums as a session musician, and so they asked him to join the band. Now, apparently Rick was actually still under contract when he joined the band, so he couldn't actually get any writing credits for the next Yes album, Fragile, released here in 1971. But anyway, now we hit the classic lineup of the band, at least one of two of them, probably the one that most Yes fans will say is the best one. Jon Anderson on vocals, Steve Howe on guitar, Chris Squire on bass, Rick Wakeman on keyboards, and Bill Bruford on drums. Fragile, again, giving us some of these longer songs, showing really fantastic musicianship and great instrumental parts. We have like a Roundabout, South Side of the Sky, Heart of the Sunrise, great tracks. And then we've got each band member contributing a track of their own. So what do we have here? Cans and Brahms, an classical instrumental bit by Rick Wakeman. We have Heaven, just layers and layers of vocals by Jon Anderson. I actually quite like that one, really. I think it's pretty good. 5% for Nothing. This is Bill Bruford expressing his dissatisfaction with somebody in the Yes management system who was apparently getting 5% for doing nothing. And so he expressed this in an instrumental track for the album. The Fish by Chris Squire, Bill Bruford on drums, and then just different layers of different bass performances layered over top. I was really thrilled to see Chris actually play this live. Of course, he doesn't play like several different bass parts at once, but it was really cool. Of course, A Mood for a Day, another acoustic instrumental by Steve Howe. And yeah, that's it. That's the whole band. And then Heart of the Sunrise. They also released a track called America. Again, another musical, West Side Story again, was it? Cover that they did and did it in Yes style. And that appears as a bonus track on this one here. The cat is watching the bug on the ceiling. I don't think I had this many interruptions and problems with any video I've ever done. Occasional cat interruptions, yes, but bugs, cats fighting, yeah. So, that brings us up to 1972, and what is often considered one of the best examples of a progressive rock album ever. In fact, some years back, I took a look at several lists of all the top progressive rock albums of all time, and I did a total of all the averages, and it came out that King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King and Yes is Close to the Edge were tied for first place with having the highest positions over all those lists I checked. So here it is, Close to the Edge. Side 1 being like a suite, composed as a suite, an entire track of over 18 minutes, and then side 2, You and I and Siberian Khatru. Really an amazing, incredible album. I love the song Close to the Edge. I really got into it, and I can listen to that anytime. There's just so much happening in that song that gets my attention. You and I, another beautiful thing with acoustic guitar, lots of nice mellotron, and Siberian Quattro showcasing some of John Anderson's interesting lyric writing. Blue tail fly, whatever. I like that part. I like how he puts those words together. And again, the music in the song is really incredible. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. It's an incredible album. There was one guy, I forget his name now, Jamal somebody. He is a reaction YouTuber, and he reacted to this song, and at the end he said, of all the songs he has been reacting to over the last few years, he said this is the best song that he has ever heard. Which I find quite surprising, because he looks more like he should be into rap or hip-hop, but he really appreciates all kinds of music, and he happened to say that was the best song that he had heard in all the time that he had been doing his channel. So great. However, at this point here, Bill Bruford felt that, bands, they take some time to get into full swing, and then it takes a few albums before they get that album that just has everything working for it. And he said, that's it, that's the cookie, and there's nothing more that I can see I can do in Yes to further my drumming abilities, and I want something with more of a challenge, and I'm going to join King Crimson. So at the end of the tour, actually not even at the end of the tour, I think he walked off before the tour ended, or was it at the end of the tour? I forget exactly, but the band started looking around for new drummers. Ainsley Dunbar was considered, by the way, I read that. However, they ended up getting in Alan White, who had played with the Plastic Ono Band, as well as, I think, Elton John and some other people as well. So they then began working on the, what to do with Yes next after Close to the Edge. So the idea was John Anderson and Steve Howe would work on something for the band that would be 4 side-long epics. The cat is really looking after the bug. I better get that bug out of here. All right. Yeah, it does stink in here now. That bug did his little bit of gassing there, so whatever. So anyway, here we go. Tales from Topographic Oceans, 1973, a double album with 1 song on each side. And I gotta say, I listened to this again the other day, and I ended up enjoying listening to it so much that I went and listened to it one more time the next day. I've always liked the album. The opening track here, The Revealing Science of God, that one there has been one of my favorite Yes songs. However, I always felt the rest of the album was kind of spotty, having some parts interesting and some parts a little bit quiet or some parts a little bit weird. But listening to it the other day, it suddenly all really made sense to me. You've got the opening, big epic track there. It goes like, quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud. I really noticed that last time, but it has got so much interesting music in it. Several parts that I just love to hear. One thing is when they sing that, was it Starshine something, and then the drums just come into this regular beat, and Steve Howe's guitar is actually a bit edgy and fierce. They do it again later on with Rick Wakeman playing piano, but it doesn't have the same edge to it as when that guitar comes in, but that's cool anyway. There are several other parts too that I really like, that 70s galloping clean guitar sound, that and then they've got Rick Wakeman's keyboard solo, which is one of my absolute favorites. I think my favorite keyboard solo of his, where the synthesizer is just like screaming and wavering the notes, and it just sounds so insane and so crazy. But yeah, the next track, The Remembering, the High Memory, I always felt that song was a really slow build. The first half basically building up to the very exciting and fun and interesting second half. But as I was listening to it the other day, one line caught my ear. The school gates remind us of our class. And it just suddenly snapped me into the song. I suddenly was really paying attention to it. And it's like it all really made sense. Like that song must be the second track. Because after the exciting adventure, that's the first track. You don't want to repeat that. So take it a little more slowly, build it up quietly, get the interest in the lyrics in there, and then get into the more exciting part later on. I suddenly like that song a lot more, and now the quiet part that I used to just kind of let pass by, I'm into it. Then we get on to the Ancients, the Giants Under the Sun, And I think that's where the band tried to go a little bit King Crimson in places, because they have that really angular guitar playing. The drumming is quite unusual for a Yes. And Chris Squire's bass sound has that big, wet, growly John Wetton sound to it that I hear on especially like the Red album by King Crimson. So I find that the band are now putting in as the third track something that is a little bit more out there and different from anything they have done so far. And then we get to the final track, Nous sommes du soleil. This is some references coming back in from the first track. You hear some little bits that were in the first track, some moments, but as well, it's building its own thing, and it comes up to a really nice conclusion to the whole album, right? So actually I have, my appreciation for this album has increased after giving it an ear twice now in the past week. Of course, this is one where Rick Wakeman thought it was a little bit over bloated, and some parts just seemed to go on for too long or didn't need to be there. At times, he actually had nothing to do. Black Sabbath were nearby in a studio like down the hall or something, so he actually went in and contributed some keyboard parts to the Sabbath Bloody Sabbath album because he had, nothing to do, and apparently he was happy to be paid in a case of beer. So anyway, but yeah, this album came out. It actually sold gold level by pre-orders alone. Yes, we're that much in demand. In retrospect, some people, especially critics, were a bit harsh on the album, but these days fans are kind of split. Some of them saying it's a little bit overdone, it didn't need to be that long. Other people saying it's an absolute brilliant piece of work, and I've shifted over to it's a brilliant piece of work. Yeah. What else was it? During the tour, they actually wanted to have this done like an orchestral situation. So the show started at a specific time and the doors closed, and if you were not in your seats or not in the theater at that time, you were locked out. Too bad, you couldn't get in, right? So that kind of, made some people rather unhappy about that. But that's where that went, and at the end of it all, Rick Wakeman thought, I'm not into what the band is doing anymore, and I'm going to, go do my own thing. Which he did, and went off to do his, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and the Six Wives of Henry VIII, and that kind of thing. Started his own rather successful solo career, and rather expensive solo career, something that is mentioned in here, the high cost of doing, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table as an ice skating performance to music. But anyway, the band, moving along, decided on we're choosing some different keyboard players, and ended up choosing Patrick Moraz from Switzerland, who was kind of a more avant-garde jazz style player, and that's something that Yes wanted to try doing. So he came in and they put together the Relayer album, which opens with side one being entirely one track, The Gates of Delirium. Now this is really kind of interesting. In the previous album, by the way, they had a split between recording in the city or the country, and so apparently they recorded at a studio in the city, but stuff was brought in to make it look like a countryside setting, like a cardboard cutout of a cow and hay around. But anyway, on with the Relayer album. I'm mentioning this about the last one because for the studio this time here, for the Gates of Delirium, they wanted to capture the chaos and clashing sounds of war, and so they brought in all sorts of scrap metal stuff from a scrap metal yard, and during the recording of the song they were running around banging on springs and car doors and whatever else they had brought in, and there was this one board they had set up with all these different bits of scrap metal hanging from it, and at one point they just knocked the whole thing over, crashing to the floor. Now actually I find listening to the album, we can hear those sounds, but they don't dominate, they don't override the music. They become part of the music, so I think they did it really well. We have that turbulent music, very exciting and very chaotic feeling, and then we hear all these crashing metallic sounds in there. So it's done very well. And Gates of Delirium, again, it was not one of my top 3 extended epic yes tracks. However, again, listening to it recently, I really liked it, and I listened to it once more after that because I actually enjoyed it so much. Maybe it's just that I hadn't heard these tracks for a few years now, and it was just really nice to hear them again. I realized how much I actually enjoy Yes's music and why Yes became one of my favorite bands after I really got into them some 12 years ago. But anyway, side 2, Sound Chaser, that one I've always loved. I've always thought that was just such an interesting Yes song. And what is it? To Be Over, the final track, which is one I've never totally sunk my teeth into, but still pretty nice, pretty nice. I just don't remember so much about that one. But anyway, that album there with Patrick Moraz, and then after touring for this one, the members of Yes decided it was probably a good idea for everyone to take a bit of a break. And so everyone went off and recorded their own solo album. Of course, John Anderson doing Elias of St. Hilo, Chris Squire doing The Fish, Alan White did a solo album. Steve Howe did his first of many solo albums. I think it might have been his first. And even Patrick Moraz, of course, doing his own. And they reconvened in 1976, toured once again, very successful tour, and began writing material for the new album. However, it was during this time John Anderson felt that Patrick Moraz wasn't as into it the same way that they were going. And Yes, we're thinking of changing their sound again, moving away from the really long epic tracks that they had been doing now the last few albums. And so, yeah, John Anderson felt maybe I should send Rick Wakeman a couple of our new tracks like Wondrous Stories and Going for the One. And so he sent them to Rick, and Rick thought, no, this is the kind of Yes that I can do something with. So Rick was invited to come in as a session musician, and Patrick was dismissed. Now, Patrick claims that he said he didn't expect it. He didn't expect that he would be let go of the band. As far as he was concerned, he was the keyboard player. However, he said, some people did not play the game fairly, and in the end, it was a band decision to let me go. I think he's probably talking about manager Brian Lane and John Anderson. But as we see, John Anderson is basically the band leader, and he decides when it's time for someone to go, and also when it's time for someone to come back. So Rick Wakeman, welcome back as a session musician, and they set about recording in Switzerland this time because all members were in tax exile, the Going for the One album, released in 1977. There were some difficulties here. Their producer, Eddie Offord, who had produced most of their albums, I think, he felt that his style was getting a little stale, and he thought it would be best for him to depart from Yes and try working with some other bands. So Yes brought in another one, I think his name was John Timperley. Anyway, he was kind of a new guy, and according to the Wikipedia article, he said that he basically just watched what everyone was doing to learn the ropes. Basically, he didn't really contribute his work as a producer, and in the end, the band is credited as producing this album. What happened because of that then was that the band basically were trying to make decisions, and arguments ensued about how things should sound. The ending result is, for me, this album is just not such a pleasure to listen to. It's the sound. It's not the songs. It's not the music. It is the sound. I feel there is like a harsh sheen, like an audio version of a sheen that's getting in my eyes. You know, it's getting in my ears. This is the 8th album, and hopefully that was the last interruption. One interesting point I read about was that when they were recording Parallels, Rick Wakeman played a pipe organ at a church that was 4 miles down the road. And so when they recorded it together as a band, what they did was they had Rick connected by telephone, and the band played in the studio, and Rick, listening by telephone, played the pipe organ in the church 4 miles away, and then that was recorded separately from the rest of the band, and so that his organ parts were overdubbed later on there. Parallels, I quite like it. Wondrous Stories was released as a single and became their highest charting single in Britain, I think going up to number 7. The album, within 2 weeks, sold 500,000 copies. So, you know, at the time, at the 1977, when the punk movement is going really big, Yes had a fantastic success with this album here. The final track on here, Awaken, is the one really long epic track, which is like 17 minutes and something, and I think it's an incredible piece of work. Again, the actual sound quality is not up to par with previous Yes albums, but the music itself is brilliant. It's a wonderful, wonderful track. So that takes us up to the 8th album. Now, apparently after this, Yes decided they wanted Rick to rejoin the band because touring for this, it would be very difficult to get a session musician or temporary keyboard player to be able to play Rick's parts. So they asked if he would rejoin, to which he then agreed. However, after agreeing, he then found out that they had already reported to the music press that Rick was back, and he found himself on the cover of Melody Maker with it reported that he had already joined Yes. That's how that goes, eh? So yeah, the band, big success with that one there, and then went into the studio to start writing material for their 9th album. Now this is where things start getting a little bit gray. Alright, in our stories of the first 10 albums of a band, we've seen most bands at some point during these 10 years, first 10 albums, having some kind of struggle, usually somewhere around the 8th and 9th album. And again, the problems start setting in here. We already saw it on this album here, where the band were a little bit at each other's throats in the studio, where they couldn't agree on how things should be mixed. And the same thing happened here. They actually asked Eddie Offord to come back in as producer, but he left again soon after the recording started. And once again, the band produced the album themselves, and once again, lots of things. Either people couldn't say what they wanted to say, like, Steve, you should really re-record that guitar part, or John, maybe you should be singing that vocal line. Things like that weren't being said. Rick Wakeman also feels that his performance on here was about 60% good, and the other 40% really needed to be redone. He also had started on the previous album playing, the Polymoog synthesizer, which they felt that synthesizer sound actually was too close to Steve Howe's guitar sound. And that is honestly another thing I noticed with these two albums, Going for the One and Tornado, is that the keyboard sound and the guitar sound often clash, and maybe that's what's giving that sheen that I'm picking up, you know? It's sometimes hard to tell what's going on, like two very similar sounds playing different things but coming together, and yeah, it does make it a little difficult to hear. Also, Rick started playing this, what was it called? The Byrotron, which was kind of a new version, an upgraded, better version of a Mellotron, which he had also invested some money in developing. And then, you know, within a year after this, new style of synthesizers came out that made this Byrotron obsolete before it even took off. However, he's playing that on this album as well. Clashes in the studio about how things should sound, how things should record. Band is kind of losing their direction. Apparently, they found that a lot of the stuff that they made in the studio just became too difficult to play live, or when they were rehearsing it, just the tensions that had been in the studio brought back memories for them, and they ended up not playing many of these songs live at all. The song Don't Kill the Whale actually was released as a single, which did all right. The album cover was originally supposed to be of the Yes Tour, one of the famous tours, rock formations on top of the hills there in the west side of England. They were not happy with the album cover. They actually had originally been calling this album 11th Illusion, I think was the original working title. And they also had written enough material that they planned to release it as 2 albums. First one being released earlier in the year, and next one being released just before Christmas. So it was supposed to be 2 albums in a set, 11th Illusion. Yes Tour was supposed to be the cover photo. In the end, they put this guy with these sticks standing in front of Yes Tour, and when Hypnosis revealed it to the band, somebody threw a tomato at it. Rick claims that he threw a tomato at it. Brian Lane, the manager, claims that tomatoes were thrown and some of them hit the picture. Hypnosis claimed that they threw the tomato at it. Whatever. Nevertheless, a tomato is on the cover of the album, thus naming the album Tormato. So yeah, okay. So tomatoes are flying. Music is getting a little bit difficult. Sounds are clashing. Opinions are clashing. the idea of having two albums didn't pan out. A single album was released, and by now we find the band is at that point where so many bands reach by the 8th or ninth album. They gathered together for some new sessions in Paris, called the Paris Sessions. And during this time, I think it was initially Steve Howe and Chris Squire who felt maybe it was time for, them to not continue in the band. But Rick Wakeman and John Anderson originally wanted to keep the band going. However, there was a changeover. Chris and Steve actually decided they did want to keep going on, but by then Rick and John had thought, well, maybe it is best, and they left. They left the band. John went off to work with the keyboard player Vangelis, as well as to do solo work. Rick went back to his solo work as well. And so now we had Steve Howe, Chris Squire, and Alan White, without a singer, without a keyboard player. So what happened was Brian Lane happened to, was he managing the Buggles? Or anyway knew them? Or they were in a studio nearby? In any case, he introduced Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes to Yes. Now, both guys were fans of Yes. They'd actually even written some music that they had hoped to introduce to Yes, a track called Fly From Here. Chris Squire liked the Buggles song, Video Killed the Radio Star, and so it was decided that they would try to do something together, and that resulted in the album Drama, which is Yes's 10th album. And now, apparently this album came together quite quickly because Yes dissolved in 1980 with Rick and John leaving. And so with Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes in, they'd already had some material ready. The band recorded and played various material, worked things out, and put out an album quite swiftly. Roger Dean now coming back again, doing the album artwork, and the album actually sold rather well. However, during the tours, they did better live in the US, where the new vocalist was more readily accepted than in the UK, where a lot of fans were not happy that John Anderson wasn't with the band anymore. This is actually a pretty cool album. It features one of Yes's heaviest guitar riffs ever with the Machine Messiah track. And there are just some really other cool ones on here. Tempest Fugit, of course, and Does It Really Happen, I think, were also really good ones. Into the Lens was actually released as a single, but I'd never heard of it. Yeah, in retrospect, a lot of people now consider this album to be one of Yes's really great albums, even though some people were not so happy with it at the time because of the changeover. However, at this point here, 10th album, Yes seems to be finding new feet, and then things just fell apart. First thing was that after the tour, Chris Squire and Alan White decided they would leave the band. And after that, Trevor Horn decided he was going to go back to being a producer. He'd had a really difficult time as a vocalist, live, particularly in England. And so that left Jeff Downes and Steve Howe, and they decided to team up with Carl Palmer and John Wetton and form Asia. So in 1981, it was officially announced that Yes had become inactive, or basically were no more. Chris Squire and Alan White, of course, then teamed up with Jimmy Page for a temporary project called XYZ, Yes Zeppelin. Robert Plant was asked to join, but refused, still grieving over the loss of John Bonham. And that project eventually fell through. I did find on YouTube some of the demos recorded from that time those guys were together, and interestingly, some of the music actually ends up on the Keys to Ascension album. I think the song Mind Drive actually uses some of the music that was originally written when Chris Squire and Alan White were with Jimmy Page. So yeah, we reached the 10th album of Yes, and we find that Yes has dissolved and is no more. However, as we know, Alan White and Chris Squire would team up with Trevor Rabin and form a new band called Cinema, which would then incorporate Tony Kaye on keys and John Anderson on vocals and Trevor Horn as a producer, and end up, at the suggestion of the record company, just call the band Yes. You're going to have more success being called Yes than Cinema. And by the way, there were 3 other bands called Cinema who were starting to look at suing the band if the band used their name So that concludes our run of Yes's first 10 albums and what happened with the band there. So that's it for this one here. That also wraps up our July band videos. Now we've got 2 more to look at for August, but I'll hopefully get another couple of videos out before then. So thanks for watching this one here, everyone. Take care and stay cool. You know, it's like 32 degrees in this room here today. Bye.